Hey guys, this is Allison from Allykatkreations. How are you? Please hit that like, share, and subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And if you get anything from my work, a connected dot, a mushroom cloud like I had the other day, a new author to read, a new book to explore, please consider supporting my work, and all the information will be linked in the description box below the video. Yes, I did a large rant yesterday and I had no choice because it needed to come out. But today I'm going to start a new book as a waspe, Urantia, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, The Secret Doctrine by Blavatsky. Those are huge undertaking books, and I like to fit shorter ones in the mix. So without further ado, just get to all the fun title stuff here. The Truth About Evolution and the Bible. Dun dun dun. By Harriette Augusta Curtis and Homer F. Homer Curtis. The Order of Christian Mystics. I love all their work. Thus far that I've read 3 of the books on this channel. They're amazing. Very, very highly amazing. And this one is just one of those books that I'm not sure about what direction it's going to go. We're going to find out together. We're going to find out all together. Evolution. This is before the introduction. It's like a poem by somebody. And then we'll get into the juicy fun stuff. But I thought, just like all of their books, they put a lot of quotes and poems and stuff. So let's start. They quiver, shift and change like human hope. These mirage forms in the kaleidoscope abide their little hour and are gone, as life's fast-flying wheel whirls ever on. Each flows on from one evolved before, in equal charm or maybe less or more. But naught remains unchanged. All things must shift into such forms as next may be the gift of him who turns the wheel, yet see the law with servitude serene, infinite draw. A golden thread forever through the maze, uniting present, past, and future days. Though men with tints and colors may essay, they work inside of lines drawn yesterday. Tomorrow shows a scene of woe or weal, a sequence sure of this day's sloth or zeal. Thus runs the law, life's atoms bring arranging, and combinations new reflect the changing. Each form has intimate, complete relation to that just past is source and duration. Learn day by day, similitude to scan. See in this toy somewhat the way of man. From out the spiritual sun a ray, held by the magic of the law in clay. Who knows what fairest form of all shall last and perfect our shoulders fall. Fred Burbank lines. Interesting. Introduction. Quote, get wisdom, get understanding, forget it not. Forsake her not, and she shall preserve thee. Love her, and she shall keep thee. End quote. Proverbs. Quote, Men who know very little of science and men who know very little of religion do indeed get to quarreling, and the onlookers imagine that there is a conflict between science and religion, whereas the conflict is only between two different species of ignorance. End quote. Professor Roped A. Milken Colliers. Sorry, guys. My vision's blurry. I don't know why. Quote, wisdom is the principal thing, end quote. Solomon tells us, quote, therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding, end quote. If we have a real understanding of a principle, we can grasp and comprehend the many seemingly conflicting aspects of its manifestation, and thus solve the problems its diverse aspects may present. This is particularly true of the apparent conflict between the doctrine of evolution and the statements of the Bible as to the origin of man. For if we really understand what evolution means, and if we understand what the Bible really says as to the origin of man, we will find that there is no conflict between science and religion, or between evolution and the Bible, only between misconceptions on both sides. Both sides are right in a way, but both are talking about entirely different things. Since it would require several volumes to expound and fully corroborate the philosophy presented in this volume, especially its theological implications, and although many theological card houses will necessarily be toppled over because they are built upon the shifting sands of human speculation instead of upon cosmic law and the rock of eternal truth, nevertheless, we will have to confine ourselves more to an outline than to a complete exposition of the subject. In the subsequent pages, if we do not give more elaborate collaborative examples and arguments, or if at times we may speak somewhat dogmatically, it should be remembered that only sufficient of the philosophy can be given herein to substantiate our main thesis. We will endeavor, however, to give sufficient illustrations and to point out the same laws working in nature all about us to convince the average unprejudiced mind that does not have a thesis of its own to modify or to discard, or it can grasp a new conception. Those who are studiously inclined will find many of the points more fully elaborated in our other volumes. To gain a true understanding of any principle or problem, we must have, firstly, a willingness to accept truth when it is proved to us. And secondly, we must have minds whose channels of thinking are not fossilized into groves by traditions which mold and distort every fact according to preconceived conceptions. In other words, not only must we have minds that are plastic enough to grasp new ideas, but we must have the willingness to accept new points of view, new conceptions, and new truths when they are demonstrated to us. Also, we must not permit our emotions, whether religious or scientific, impatience or intellectual contempt, to enter into what should be a calm, rational, and scientific examination of the proved facts of the case and the unvarying laws of nature back for them. For if we do, the resulting emotional storm upsets the quiet balance of our reasoning and even of our intuitive faculties, and blinds us to the truth, no matter how unassailable presented, both logically and scientifically. As we have said elsewhere, quote, it is well to heed the past, yet not to live in it, and say that which has been is all that can ever be, but to reason intellectually from the underlying principles which are the same yesterday, today, and forever, although they find ever greater faculties for more perfect expression as evolution advances. The tree of life grows from the age to age and puts forth fresh branches and leaves and fruit perhaps undreamed of. when it was but a sapling. Nevertheless, it grows always from the everlasting root, and but expresses that which was present, although unmanifested within the seed. And ever it is the same fundamental process of nature which puts forth its new experiences. Proved facts are remedies, while appearances may be but certain aspects of those facts, seen under varying and often limiting conditions. With the investigations of science and the progress of knowledge, both our understanding and our interpretation of facts must progress and enlarge. New scientific interpretations of facts often require some time for their general acceptance because of the inertia of the mind and the power of habit, or the impetus of former ideas. Yet because of the willingness, even eagerness, of the truly scientific mind to arrive at the truth, it is willingness to thrash about objections in the open. The period required for the acceptance of new conceptions and new truths in the scientific world is relatively short. But in religious matters, the case is far different. The spiritual realities, the eternal varieties, are ever the same. Yet with the advance of knowledge and the expansion of man's consciousness, these interpretations should also advance as greater light is shed upon them. However, in the religious field, there is not the willingness to face truth and modify old conceptions, even if those old conceptions were made by handful of men during the Dark Ages. The minds of a majority in the Christian world today are still shackled and limited by the creeds and dogmas formulated so long ago by the respective churches. They fail to realize that there is no creeds or dogmas in the Bible, that all such are but man-made interpretations of certain spiritual truths, made by groups of men fallible as ourselves in long bygone ages, where the knowledge of nature and her laws were limited, was speculative instead of scientific. Many religious conceptions today are in much the same class as were the conceptions of science, medicine during the Dark Ages. Since the fundamentalists are literalists, they may be regarded as materialists in religion, failing to recognize that they are living in the age of radium, the radio, television, and the aeroplane. They fail to realize that mankind will no longer tolerate the ox cart or the one-horse chase interpretations of either scientific or religious truths, but insists on mental and spiritual aeroplanes in which they can rise above the literal, materialistic, and earth-plane conceptions of former ages and get an aerial view of the spiritual landscapes, and so judge as to the relative value of mere appearances. Yet the fundamentalists are right in holding to their inner realization that man was created in the image of God and not of an ape. But it depends upon their conception of definition of man. On the other hand, science is right in claiming that all forms of life on Earth, both plant and animal, have evolved gradually from the simplest beings, and that these forms have developed, although not uniformly, through successive stages of complexity until they culminate in man. Apparently, these two ideas are contradictory. Diametrically, sorry guys, I cannot get that word projected properly, opposed and irreconcilable, and yet in truth they are not. The conflict is only between the respective definitions of man, one refers to spiritual man and the other to the physical vehicle or body. Yet both these two men are distinctly mentioned and accurately described in the Bible. It is the failure to make the distinction and discrimination between these two that has caused the confusion and led to the controversy between the two schools of thought. Both are sincere and both stand firmly for their honest convictions, and both are right from their point of view. But in both cases, their point of view is limited by the lack of understanding of all the facts in the case and to their lack of consideration of others' viewpoints. That's really where we are right now in the world. It is just this lack of understanding each of the other which we hope to remedy in this volume by pointing out to both the plain statements of the Bible, which support both sides and thus reconcile all their differences through the true understanding and resulting wisdom. So, this shall be very interesting, very curious. And for those of you who are new to my channel and new followers, sorry to the old, you have to hear this again. Allison, me, is dyslexic. I also have these, they fall down. I've taken them out in other videos. Sometimes they get loose. I have a hard time projecting certain words because of this issue of my teeth. And until I get either a matrix job or enough income to go get some dentures or implants, I could care less at this point. I also have no back teeth. This is where I'm at. So please, I do apologize for Miss Pant not being able to project or pronounce certain words properly, but we all have something. And the words and the work has to get out regardless. So bear with me. The truth about evolution in the Bible, chapter 1. Science. Quote, evolution is a natural history of the cosmos, including organic beings expressed in physical terms as a mechanical process. End quote. Encyclopedia Britannica. Who knew? Quote, anyone who is practically acquainted with scientific works is aware that those who refuse to go beyond fact rarely get as far as fact. End quote. Collective Essays, Huxley. Quote, it is not beyond belief that we may sometime be able to do in our laboratories what the sun is doing in its laboratory. But to what end? Without the moral background of religion, without the spirit of service, which is the essence of religion, our new powers will only be means of our own destruction, end quote. Professor Robert A. Milken. Or Robt. It's shortened. Science is the handmaiden of religion. But at present she is on a strike because she will not accept as scientific facts man-made dogmas in which she can find no evidence of facts. The desire to know and understand is an intellectual manifestation of the soul's inherent desire for truth. It finds expression in the intellectual awakened through curiosity, transient or persistent according to the degree of awakening. The result of such curiosity is more critical observation of appearances, phenomena, and events. And when such observations are organized and studied, they lead to the discovery of facts and the laws of manifestation underlying them. Such facts and laws, when repeatedly observed, proved, and demonstrated, are said to be scientific. Hence, science has been called organized knowledge. Knowledge which can be demonstrated at any appropriate time and place by anyone who complies with the laws involved. The facts and laws thus discovered and proved by science, especially during the last half century, are truly marvelous, most enlightening, and mind-expanding, as well as extremely valuable. They underlie all of our modern civilization, all our creature comforts, and all of our conceptions of life and the universe in which we live. Where would we be today, for instance, without the steam and gas engines, without electricity, aeroplanes, the radio, etc.? And if acceptance of these facts and laws discovered by science is essential to modern civilization and comfort, it is equally essential that we accept other facts which have just as painstakingly and accurately been proved by science, even though we are not as familiar with all the steps of their demonstration. When practically the whole scientific world agrees as to the accuracy of certain clearly demonstrated facts, it is but exposing both our ignorance and our mental fossilization. It is assassination of our reasoning faculties to deny them. We can, however, deny not the facts, but certain scientific interpretations of them. In fact, in the light of new discoveries, the scientific world itself necessarily changes its interpretations of the facts so frequently that its textbooks have to be rewritten every few years. In the scientific world, there are perhaps no facts more clearly demonstrated than the higher and complex forms of life have been gradually evolved through the ages from organisms so simple that they are composed of one cell. In fact, our own bodies today arise from the single cell formed by the fusion of masculine and feminine germ cells of our parents. The science of both biology shows not only each stage in the development of complex forms, from the simple by the acquirement of new functions, but it can trace the beginning and progressive development of every organ and function, from the primitive differentiation of the protoplasm up to the fully developed nervous system and enormous brain of man, from the primitive sense spot to the fully developed eye, from the straight digestive tube to the complex digestive tract, from the straight pulsating blood vessel to the heart and complicated circulatory system, etc. The science of embryology has proved that all forms evolve from a single cell. Furthermore, during its intrauterine evolution, each form of life passes successfully through the stages of all the lesser forms below in its evolution. For instance, the human embryo, like all mammals, has its leaf-like stage, its fish stage with gill slits in the neck, one of which still persists as the Eustachian canal, the Eustachian tube, connecting the ear with the mouth, its reptile stage, its mammal stage, etc. In some stages, the organs, which are only vestiges in adult men, are still prominent in the lower animals. For instance, at one stage of the human embryo, the tail is longer than the leg. Yet after birth, the only trace of a tail is rudimentary chain of bones at the lower end of the spine, the coccyx. There have been cataloged no less than 180 structures that are but rudimentary or vestigial in man, although these structures are fully developed and functioning in lower forms in animal life. The science of the comparative anatomy shows that there are no essential differences in the structure of man and many lower forms, the horse, dog, ostrich, whale, frog, etc. Only modifications of the same general plan. Quote, the resemblance after the first 4 weeks growth between the embryo of a man and a dog is such that it is scarcely possible to distinguish them, end quote. The embryo of a whale, which was once a land animal, is coated with hair, but has rudimentary teeth and hind legs plainly apparent, and its skeletal still remains the rudimentary leg bones, even though their function has been discontinued. Together with anthropology, the science of paleontology, the science of the fossil remains of animals, have collectively, by virtue, have a complete set of fossil forms, from the simplest trilobites, ammonites, up to the most complex forms, the series of the changes in each form often being complete. The series showing the evolution of the horse from a five-toed creature, scarcely larger than a rabbit, up to the modern one-toed horse, for instance, is quite complete. The lowest and earliest strata of rocks show only the lowest types of shell forms, but the higher and more recent strata show, in precise succession, fishes, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Siri was spying on me again. That's becoming a big problem. I don't know how to shut her off on this desktop. Every general type form in this imperishable and irrefutable record of the rocks is followed by precisely the same order by the development of human embryo, showing that its form had been progressively developed through all those stages. Certain blanks in the geological record still occur, but certain fossil remains of man have been found which trace him back through the close of the Pliocene period, a period which endured at least 250,000 years, into the still older Miocene period, which was certainly twice as long as a Pliocene. And in the Miocene strata, many types of giant arthropods have been found. Yet the process of evolution is far from a mechanical one, or we would not find primitive forms from unicellular organisms up to man, which as newly discovered tribes in New Guinea, which are still in the Stone Age and without metal of any kind, still persisting. If it were merely a mechanical process, all forms would have evolved practically together, and we would now have only the highest types found today. Yet the Bushman and the Black Boy, sorry guys, just a pause. This was written in the early 1900s. I don't agree with a lot of the interpretations of what they're that stuff bothers me, and I do apologize. I don't subscribe to that bullshit. We're all one race. We're humans. We all have different skin tones and beautiful things about us. We were everything before we entered the bodies that we're in my eyes. So please know the ignorance of these authors when it comes to describing these traits, and I'll try to kind of do my own edits because I don't like projecting that out. It makes me uncomfortable. Have made practically no advances above the most primitive stages, while many highly cultured races have flourished and disappeared, and highly civilized nations have suddenly been plunged backward in barbarism, not once in history, but many times, as the ruins of a score of empires mutability testify. In fact, nowhere to be found a constant, ever-flowing progress in every species. Nowhere is there evidence of one species uniformly, only approximately shadowing off into the next higher, and so up onto man. As it is claimed by the materialists as the absolute rule, the sudden breaking gaps can only be explained as the result of discriminating superphysical consciousness working out a predetermined plan. Quote, certain well-marked forms of living beings have existed through enormous epochs, surviving not only the changes of physical conditions, environment, but persisting comparatively unaltered, while other forms of life have appeared and disappeared, and examples of them are abundant enough to both the animal and the vegetable worlds, end quote. Therefore, evolution is far from being the mere mechanical process which materialism would have us believe. There is such a vast abyss between the anatomy and physiology of the larva and that of the perfect insect that it is evidently impossible to find a natural selection, the explanation of its ancestral evolution. There are many factors which science has not yet discovered or which is refused to recognize. There is so much we do not yet understand. Will the day ever come when we can explain why the brain of man has made such great progress, while that of a gorilla has fallen far behind? Can we explain why inherited ability falls to one family and not to another? Or why, in the matter of cerebral endowment, one race or mankind has fared so much better than the other? Let me finish this and I'll put a pause on that. We have as yet to explain to offer the final decisive judgment on the theory of evolution may not be delivered on our time. Meanwhile, we think its most enlightenment advocates would not claim more for it than that is a working hypothesis which explains the known facts more satisfactorily than any other. The conclusion may be right or they may be wrong, but they are not proved in the sense that a mathematical or a chemical problem can be proved. What the authors fail to realize that they, in fact, are themselves indoctrinated into what we want to call manipulation and infiltration into the divine order of things. Things have been manipulated. They're very well aware of this. But also the evolution of man and things have been manipulated. I go in a lot of discussion on that in my last video. But for argument's sake, there's no mistake why certain races of people have been, not necessarily by physiology or by religious standards, pushed down. It was planned that way. By the very people who write the books. By the very people who make the world a harder place to live in for everybody, not just one race. They're getting their information from what was available to them back at that time frame. But still the stuff holds true because we're still in that paradigm. When people will stop allowing things to dictate their reality, stand in their own power, and overcome the adversity that was handed to them, that they wrote into their own script, because that's a test that they need to overcome and pass, the world would be a better place if we all understood that. Just saying. Yet there is so much actual physical and logically irrefutable evidence as to the progressive evolution of forms that it can be ignored or denied. The important thing is that all has to do with forms only, not with the cause or reasons for these forms, or the life, spirit, and consciousness which animates them. Quote, nothing is really greater than in the scope of the plan of an evolved universe than the growth of man from almost amongst the lowest forms of life to being an intellect and soul, struggling to define his own relation to his creator, aware of his obligations to his creator and his fellow man, developing a normal law of altruism and a progress in self-restraint and duty to a power higher than himself, which works for righteousness, end quote. That should be noted. Chapter 2, Materialism. Fun times. Quote, materialism in philosophy is a theory which regards all the facts of the universe as explainable in terms of matter and motion, and in particular explains all cycle processes by the physical and chemical changes in the nervous system. The business of the scientist is to explain everything by the physical causes, which are comparatively well understood, and exclude the interference of spiritual causes. End quote. Encyclopedia Britannica. Quote, you cannot possibly synthesize nature and leave out its most outstanding attributes, nor can you get these potentialities out of nature, no matter how far back you go. In other words, materialism is commonly understood is an altogether absurd and utterly irrational philosophy, and is indeed so regarded by most thoughtful men. End quote. Professor Robert, I'm right, A. Milken. Quote, by its whole biology, the insect presents the symbol of what evolution really is, and it proves that the essential cause of evolution should be sought neither in the influence of the environment nor in the reactions of organic matter to that environment, but in a dynamicism independent of the organic matter, directing it and superior to it. End quote. From the unconscious to the conscious, Gilly. Materialism is an evidence of intellectual vanity. The refusal of the intellect to admit that there is a consciousness beyond the comprehension and aspects of causation, which is unable to grasp. In spite of the marvelous achievements of science mentioned in the previous chapter, a close analysis will show that they have to do with physical things only, physical forms, conditions, and appearances. They do not deal with ultimates, with either causation, origins, or destinies. In fact, science deliberately shuts itself away from the origins and destinies, saying that they belong in the domain of philosophy, metaphysics, theology, and speculation. It therefore voluntarily limits itself to manifestations only, to phenomena, to things which can be seen, touched, and handled, or at least measured mechanically. It is thus limits the scope of its investigations and its service to mankind quite as much as would one who was investigating the color of the spectrum if he declared that he would have nothing to do with the regions of the ultraviolet or the infrared for this superficially plausible reason that they did not concern himself because he could not see them. Everything transcending the scheme of energetics is declared to be superstition. Everything transcending the limits of ordinary consciousness is declared to be pathological. A Chinese wall of positivistic sciences and methods is built up around free investigation. Everything rising above the wall is condemned as unscientific. In other words, in scientific materialism, the business of the scientist is to explain everything by the physical causes and refuse to discuss any other possibility. Once given ultimates, life, energy, consciousness, matter, materialism can furnish marvelous explanations of process, but not of causes. It explains only the intricate mechanism by means of which those ultimates find expression in matter, for these are physical phenomena which come within the scope of its self-imposed limitations, phenomena which it can trace, weigh, and measure. It can trace the transformation of energy from one form to another, but cannot explain its origin. It can analyze, catalog the chemical wow, my brain doesn't want to work today. Constituents of matter, but cannot explain its origin. It can trace the progressive evolution of the different forms through which life manifests, from lowest to highest, but it cannot explain why life manifests through any of them. It can trace with microscopic accuracy the beautiful and complex mechanism by which life manifests in the body, its growth and repair, the end products of its activities, etc. But it cannot explain life itself. It can trace the avenues by which consciousness operating through the mind affects certain brain centers to cause the movement of the muscles and thereby give expression to the idea held in the mind, but it cannot explain mind or consciousness. They, scientists, it's okay, seem to immerse us in a sort of self-acting mechanism as if everything proceeded automatically without any conscious knowledge, arrangement, guidance, or plan, as if it were a sort of haphazard universe, as if the universe were a machine, a heartless, unmindful machine. Why? Because the business of science is to explore mechanisms to detect processes by which all the functions of an organism are accomplished, end quote. Sorry, guys, between Siri and now my computer making crazy dingy noises out of nowhere because I shut everything down, I'll be right back. And I do apologize. Hopefully I fixed the situation, and I do apologize. Those sounds make me crazy as much as it makes the person listening to this crazy. I don't get it. With all its vaunted science and scientific attainments, materialism cannot explain the origin of the universe or even of the tiniest speck of protoplasm, much less can it explain life, consciousness, mind, love, altruism, self-sacrifice, duty, ideals, etc. Yet all these are just as real as wood, stone, iron, or steel, and are more powerful than any known material forces. Bingo. For men give up their lives and suffer unspeakable tortures for an ideal, sacrifice their lives to save another from drowning or from a burning building, and often give up wealth, honor, position, and family for a moral or a spiritual principle. Since materialism deals only with the processes and materials and explains neither life, death, existence, consciousness, nor idealism, it fails us in every crisis of life. Hence, it is not only an inadequate, but a false philosophy. Quote, the bankruptcy of materialism when it becomes to organizing life on earth is now evident. It becomes clearer than that the changes in our outer life, when they come, will come as a result of inner changes in man, end quote. As Professor Milken, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize for his revolutionary discoveries in electricity, well says, quote, materialism is altogether absurd and entirely irrational philosophy, and is indeed so regarded by thoughtful men, end quote. As a stimulus to physical research, materialism has done wonders in analyzing materials and explaining processes. But as a philosophy, it has been morally stupefying, spiritually a blight, almost a curse in the lives of its followers. It has turned their attention from causes to their mere effects, from origins to phenomena. And through the promotion of agnosticism and atheism, it has stifled in many the innate instinct of the human soul to believe in and seek to correlate with a supreme being or its creator and source. But thanks be, materialism as a philosophy is already dead and buried. Although some odors of its decaying corpse still linger in the backwaters of the scientific world. I'm sorry, guys. In spite of the fact that the main current of scientific thought has long since swept on the two new and higher conceptions, the person who would appear scientific yet still holds to the doctrine of materialism simply displays his ignorance of the advances which have taken place in the scientific world and is at least 2 decades behind the times. For materialism has been entirely abandoned and supplanted by dynamicism as a theory of causation. In fact, matter in the old sense of invisible physical particles no longer exists. Sorry, the atom having been shown to be but a phenomenal manifestation of 2 charges of electricity, a positive nucleus, the proton, surrounded by negative electrons. As a distinguished Russian scientist, Professor N.A. Ufimov puts it, quote, the universe consists of positive and negative corpuscles bound by electromagnetic fields. Matter disappeared. Its variety was replaced by a system of mutually related electric corpuscles, and instead of the accustomed related electric corpuscles, the accustomed material world, one deeply different. The electromagnetic world is investiging itself to us, end quote. But in such case, says Ospensky, quote, the electrons must be regarded not as electromagnetic units, but as of principles only, as two opposite aspects, phases of the world, or in other words, as metaphysical units. The transition of physics into metaphysics is inevitable if the physicists desire to be simply logical, end quote. The theory as to matter has therefore disappeared, its place being taken by the theory of energy or force. Materialism therefore no longer has a leg to stand upon. But no amount of stored energy can produce a living or even an organized form. The cause of forms is neither matter nor force. For back of any force, even life force, must be the pattern which governs and delimits the form through which the force manifests. The pattern cannot be produced without design. Design cannot be produced without the idea back of it. And ideas cannot be produced without intelligence. And intelligence cannot be manifested without mind. Causation, therefore, has been pushed back from matter to mind. Some schools of thought, in their enthusiasm for the great advance in scientific conception, go so far as to proclaim that all is mind and mind is all, and that the brain is supreme. But modern advances in psychology, and especially in psychiatrical research, sorry guys, again, old words, show that we do not think with our brains, but with our minds, and that the mind can function entirely apart from the brain and serves it after its death and disintegration in the grave, as taught in every great religion and scientifically proved under test laboratory conditions by the mountains of evidence produced by scientific psychical research. In fact, the brain is now known to be largely but physical mechanism or switchboard by which sensory impulses from the outer physical world reach the limit of the mind, and by which ideas and thoughts in the mind move the appropriate muscles necessary for the expression in the physical world. A little further consideration reveals fallacy of the mind is all doctrine, for we only have to think a moment to realize that even mind is not the ultimate factor in causation. Back of mind must be the consciousness which merely uses the mind as a mechanism for the formulation and expression of its ideas into thoughts in the mental world, as thought uses the brain as a mechanism of expression in the physical world. But back of consciousness, there must still be that which is conscious, the thinker. In its universal and cosmic aspect, it is indisputable the back of even divine mind. There must be the self-existent infinite source of force, life, and consciousness, whose center is nowhere and whose circumference is everywhere, which man calls God. This infinite source is not a being, yet from its bosom springs all beings. It is not life, yet it is the source of the one life, which animates all forms. It is not a consciousness, yet it rules and governs and manifests through all focalized expressions of consciousness. From the highest archangels, the mighty heaven-born, whose consciousness is so vast, so all-pervading, that we can but guess at its functioning, down through grade after grade of consciousness, living beings, to the consciousness of worlds, the consciousness of men, of animals, and of nature, down to the tiniest electron that goes to make up the smallest and seemingly least important manifestation of all the vast solar systems of the universe. Each is a part of some aspect of God and a manifestation of his life, consciousness, and power in its own plane and after its own kind. So there I'm going to leave it because the next chapter is the law of manifestation, which is amazing. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. So far, good. I'm enjoying I always enjoy their work, but you never know where these things are going to shift and take turns. But I hope you guys enjoyed that. That was chapter 1 and 2 in the introduction. Next time I'll tackle 3 and more. So hope you guys enjoyed. Please don't forget to hit that like button. Please share. Sorry for the annoyances. I don't know. They're after me again, the evil things that I just need to reverberate out of time space. And until next time, guys, please be safe, be seen, and sending each and every one of you protection, light, love, and shielding.